Hey everybody, and welcome back to Jim's Garage. In this video, I'm going to be setting up what I'm coining the pop-up Homelab. And what that is basically a giant compose file with some configuration files, which you can basically deploy and have up and running what I consider to be a pretty decent Homelab. It's going to have things like a reverse proxy with CrowdSec built in, serving up SSL certificates and scanning all of your traffic. It's going to have authentication for some authorization and authentication. We're going to have things like Pi-hole, we're going to have Jellyfin, IT tools, and a myriad of other things which we'll get to in a minute within the config file. The reason I'm doing this is because I want basically a repeatable test bench. I've got a load of stuff in the pipeline working with some exciting vendors as I want to reboot the whole Homelab series. I want to take us back right to the beginning about setting up a new Homelab in 2025, and this will be crucial for me to kind of get things up and running quickly on a kind of testing basis. So hopefully by the end of this video, you're going to have everything you need to spin up the pop-up Homelab. Now, I'm not professing that this is the best way to do it. Probably something like an Ansible script might be better, and there is a lot of sense, and hence why I do it personally, in having all of your compose files broken out into individual ones. It makes problem solving easier. But this should be good if you want something that's quick and going to spin up most of the common applications you're going to need. It's also useful for people who probably are starting out and don't really understand fully how some of these applications pin together, i.e. where the networks come from, how they're able to talk, what a big, long, complex Docker Compose file looks like. Anyway, enough waffling, let's jump into VS Code now and I'll talk you through this process. So for this video, I have spun up a brand new virtual machine, just running Ubuntu 24.04 Cloud, just because I want this to be an apples for apples test for when I spin up a new machine. And you can see right off the bat, it looks pretty busy over here on the right, and it sure is. There's over 670 lines of code in this Docker Compose file. Now, for each of the containers within this Docker Compose file, you can see that I've linked to the corresponding video on my channel if you would like some more information. So we'll have a quick look through all of these files, but I'm not going to go into the specifics. What I am going to go into is kind of the order in which you need to do things to get all this up and running. So just from a hierarchical standpoint, we've got the Docker Compose folder. I've called this just the pop-up Homelab. And in this folder, I've got the Docker Compose file. I've got a custom list. This doesn't actually work at the moment. I'm trying to get that working. If anyone can help, please let me know. What I'm trying to do here is basically pre-populate all of the IPs and DNS records for your traffic labels. I've got the Cloudflare token here because we're going to be pulling down an SSL certificate. I've got the acquisition file for CrowdSec, and then I've got this environment file here, which is going to provide all of the environment variables for the Docker Compose file. So for things like your VM user, i.e. here mine is Ubuntu, but whatever yours is, you can change it. The working directory, basically where you want to store your Docker data, and then the domain for the certificate you want to pull, and all of your traffic labels. I've then got things for, say, the traffic dashboard, authentic, emails, etc., and things like MyroTalk for OIDC as well. So if we hop over into the Compose file, I'll just give a high-level overview of what's going on here. So the first thing we're going to do is to set up traffic. Do consult the version 3.3 video I've got here. This is actually currently set up in the default for a valid certificate, but I've left in this folder here in Docker and then traffic.yaml. In there, you can comment out whether you want a staging certificate. I recommend for something complex like this, where there's bound to be issues, get a staging certificate. You don't want to overload the Let's Encrypt servers and get locked out of pulling a valid cert for 24 hours. Traffic will then pull a certificate using the token over here, and it will take the environment variables from this file over here. We're exposing ports 80 and 443, just the standard web servers. The dashboard is going to be set up using the credentials provided in the env file. And that's pretty much it. You can see here we're using the working directory, which is this one specified over here. So everything basically is going to go in /home, /your user, and then /docker. And is also then going to create a traffic folder in this case, and store everything in there. And the way I've got this is every single application will be in that working directory, but with its own folder. So CrowdSec will go in CrowdSec, Authentic will go in Authentic, etc. You get the idea. You can also see that in the traffic labels, I've substituted in the domain as well for you. So whenever you're doing any of these labels, as long as you've populated this correctly and it's the same as what traffic is pulling down, it should work. So after we've got traffic up, we're going to get some security. So I've added in CrowdSec here, and this is using the latest version. That's actually an older video, but that's more just for the theory. If you want to actually have a look at an up-to-date version of CrowdSec, then this is basically it. So in here, we basically just spin up CrowdSec. We tell it where the acquisition file is. That acquisition file is basically telling the CrowdSec where are the logs for traffic. And that's the reason why we've turned on logging in traffic. But basically what it needs is, this is the kind of local API up here. And the bouncer is basically the bit that does the stopping. So this is kind of checking the traffic, and then this is making a decision. So the bouncer needs to be able to connect to the CrowdSec, which connects to the traffic. Now, this won't work the first time you spin this up. What you have to do is spin this up first. CrowdSec needs to start. You then need to hop into the CrowdSec container, generate an API key. You need to come back in here, put this API key here, and respin up this container. There's not really much I can do to automate that in just a single Docker Compose, but I'll show you in a minute how simple that is. It really is straightforward. The key thing throughout all of this as well is we've got these networks here, and we've got a number of depends on. So obviously the bouncer depends on CrowdSec, and CrowdSec obviously depends on traffic. So what this basically does, it's kind of a rudimentary way of making sure that the containers are up first before the next container starts. It doesn't have the sort of logic built in for, say, health checks, i.e. is the container healthy, is it working as expected, but it will just say whether it's kind of up and assume therefore it is healthy. All of these networks, say the proxy, etc., they're going to be created, and they are actually at the bottom of the file down here. You can see that we've got this network proxy created as a bridge with a subnet that doesn't overlap. And similarly for Pi-hole, we'll come on to that in a moment. Speaking of Pi-hole, the next thing after CrowdSec is to get that DNS up and running. Now, I've got my weird and wonderful little flavor here where I route all of the requests through a Cloudflare tunnel to give you kind of a DNS over HTTPS. So that should hide any queries from your ISP, but obviously Cloudflare are going to see it anyway. And I've explained that in this video here more recently with version 6, so go and check that out. But basically this Pi-hole container, it depends on this one up here to route those DNS requests. And that's pretty much all you need to know about that. It's going to depend on Cloudflare, because if that's not up, it's not going to make DNS requests. And then again, we're putting this behind a domain name that we're going to pull a valid cert for. Now that you've got your proxy, you've got some security, and you've got your Pi-hole for your DNS, I thought it'd be good to get some authentication. And my favorite is Authentic, just because it does both the proxy and it does things like OAuth and OIDC, etc. It's kind of the one-stop shop for a Homelab. So this follows this video I've got here, updated to the latest version. It's basically going to pull down the database which Authentic needs. It's then going to use Redis, which is a key value pair stored in memory. Not really needed for a Homelab, but it's a good idea to experiment with Redis. Anything you're going to be doing at scale, if you can leverage Redis, obviously writing to memory is far quicker than writing to disk. Then you've got the server and the worker. And these are the bits that are basically responsible for actioning things. So this server, that's the thing that's going to get served up in your user interface. So that's why it's got those traffic labels and sits on the traffic network. And then the worker is basically going to connect over to the database that we just saw in the previous container. And all of these environment variables are down here in Authentic. And you can change these to whatever you want. I do recommend you go and read up the documentation on setting up SMTP, because it's good to have valid emails when you are setting things up, resetting accounts, all of those sorts of things, notifications, etc. After we've done Authentic, we get onto the good old Portainer. So this is just going to spin up Portainer using a Docker Compose file. Nothing really here to write home about. Just going to use a volume instead of a bind mount. I don't think I've ever had to use a bind mount to debug Portainer. You can just spin it up again anyway and export the settings if you need to. This is going to be then on the domain that we've set up using the certificates we've pulled with traffic. After that, we're going to set up Gotify. I like Gotify for all of my notifications, things like my firewalls, etc. Also, you can tie it in with things like uptime-kuma, which we're going to have down below, to get real-time alerting of when things are up and down. Gotify just sits again on that proxy network, and you can log in via the domain here. Next up, we've got a homepage, so you can get a nice dashboard. I like to have a dashboard in my Homelab. I think it makes everything nice and easy. There's no config file with this, so you're going to have to create a config file once it's up and running, but this will spin it up for you and you should be able to access it. Next, we've got the venerable IT tools, which I've covered recently. This is basically a one-stop shop for any IT admin. It's got loads of cool features. Go and check out my video if you want to know more. Next, I put Jellyfin in here rather than Plex. Didn't want to get a content strike. So you can just swap this out, add to it as you need. This isn't set up currently with hardware pass-through, so things like transcoding with GPU acceleration, albeit you can take these comments out here if you've got an Intel iGPU, and that should do it for you. If you want more information, check out this video here, plus I have some others for LXCs and Kubernetes on my channel. Next up, we've got MyroTalk, which I've been using for a while now, and I really like it. It's basically a video chat conferencing suite, similar to sort of Google Meet, with a load of cool handy tools. This one's dead simple to set up. Then we've got Restic. It wouldn't be a Homelab unless we had a backup solution. Now, you do want to go and check out my video on this, because this will basically spin up a basic backup. But as you can see from things like the working directories, this is going to store it locally, which is fine, but obviously you want to have a 3-2-1 backup strategy. So in the video above, I do go through mounting a NAS and then storing those backups to something like a NAS, and then to back up offsite into the cloud, which is kind of what I recommend. But this will be enough just to get you up and running, get your containers being backed up on a regular basis. After that, we've got uptime-kuma, really simple, straightforward to deploy, nothing really to write home about here. Obviously, Vault Warden, one of the crucial apps in a Homelab, and again, really straightforward to spin this up. And lastly, we want to have a VPN. I've chosen WireGuard here just because a lot of people will be using WireGuard. WireGuard Easy is very simple to use if you're not already doing something through your firewall. I haven't included things like NetBird or Headscale just because it's pretty complex. Most people probably won't need it, but for those who do, good luck. You can try and add that in here as well. Lastly, we've got those volumes, so one for Portainer and one for the database for Authentic and one for Redis, and those networks I already mentioned before. And that should be pretty much all we need to do. So what you are going to need to do is go through things like the CF token if you're using Cloudflare, put your token in here, tweak your environment variables if you need to, and tweak your traffic.yaml file in case you've got any credentials in there that you'll need to pull down a certificate. So it's worth noting as well, if you are using a default vanilla version of Ubuntu like I am, you might have problems with port 53 and Pi-hole because that's in use for Resolve. So anyway, let's jump into deploying this now, and then hopefully if I do get that error, I'll be able to fix it for you in real time. So just checking we're in the right file location. Yeah, that's right. So if we do a sudo docker compose up-d, fingers crossed, this should start pulling down everything we need. So here we go, pulling down a ton of different containers, I think 21 in total. Shouldn't take too long on my internet. Once it's pulled that down, hopefully it should create the networks as well. And everything but sort of Pi-hole should start up. I reckon it will complain about port 53. So now that's up and running pretty much. It should start those containers. So those are all now starting. Pi-hole's probably going to throw an issue. So yeah, error response from the daemon. Now I did put in this Docker Compose file here. If we go up to the Pi-hole section, you'll see the commands that we need to run. It's really simple. We just basically need to turn the stub listener off for Resolve and then restart the service. So here you see I put the command on line 126. So if we just do a nano, scroll down to the relevant area, which should be this one here. We change that to a no. And then we just need to restart the service. So restarting that service, we should now be able to run the Docker Compose up-d, and yeah, that should have restarted now the final containers. Now, because I couldn't get this custom list to actually load, you will note that I left open port 500. So you should be able to hop into a browser now, and you should be able to go to Pi-hole, and fingers crossed you should be able to log in and see what's going on in there. So hitting the URL for Pi-hole, here you can see we've got to the login page. If we go back, we'll see that the password is here. So just copying that in. Here you go, we're into Pi-hole. Some of the containers are already making requests through this, which is pretty cool. And unfortunately, like I said, I'll have to try and look into this more. It didn't actually use that custom list we created. But you can add in your new domains here and point them to, so things like traffic.yourdomain.com. you'd put it to the IP address of this machine. So in my case, 200.118. Now, if we go to the same IP address and try to load up Portainer, here you can see that we've accessed Portainer. This has all been pulled down automatically. So let me just create a password. And here you can see that we've logged in. And we should have a load of containers. Yeah, 21 containers already up and running. So here's every single container, and that worked first time. But as I said, some of these will need additional configuration. So for example, if we go to CrowdSec, it's actually parsing them, but there's nothing actually happening to it. So if we go to the bouncer log, for example, you'll see that there's no API key provided. So let's go and fix CrowdSec in a moment. But first of all, let's just check that traffic is up and running. It is. It should have pulled down a valid certificate. Let me hop into here, and then we should be able to go into Docker, and then we go to traffic. You can see it's automatically created all these folders as well. If we go to traffic, there should be a logs folder, and in there we should have the traffic log. And ignoring all the CrowdSec bouncer issues just because that's not configured correctly, you can see here that we've got an acme.json, and that's pulled down a valid certificate. So great, we know it's all working. So now we can quickly hop back into Portainer, and we should be able to get the API key for CrowdSec up and running. So the simplest way really is just to exec into CrowdSec itself, and we just want to run the following command. So I think cs cli bouncers add, and I think you can give it an optional name, so I'll just call it my bouncer. Hit return, and we get the API key, which is what we needed. So if we take that and we copy it, we want to head back now into our compose file, and we want to find the API key for CrowdSec, which was somewhere near the top. So yeah, it was actually here. So now if we paste that value in and we hit save, we should be able to now go back to the command line, and we want to re-up the stack. That should now rerun. Now it's picked up a change. You might have to actually stop the container first and go back. We'll just check that now. We can see that the bouncer traffic is starting, and fingers crossed, it's using port 8080, it's listening on 80. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that has worked because we're not getting the same error messages as we had before. So yeah, now that's healthy, and we've now got CrowdSec, and we've got the bouncer up and running, and it's now starting to actually parse it, and we're not getting the error messages that we did before. So that's good. So now all that's left really is to try and sort of test this out. So did we get a proper certificate? So you can see up here that we don't have the proper certificate. We're still using an IP. So let me just grab this IP address here. Let me head into Pi-hole. I'm going to call this one portainer.jimsgarage.co.uk. Paste in the IP address that's associated. Hit save. Now on this PC I'm recording on, I'm going to change now my DNS resolver to be this IP address here, so that we use this Pi-hole, and thus we've got access to this new record. So on Windows 11 that looks like this. So I'm just going to paste in here, hit save. And now if I try to go to Portainer, so now you can see we've got a valid SSL certificate. So let me just quickly log in. And testing this, we should log in. We should still see the same 21 containers. Yes, that's this one here. Same as this one here. And now we know that's working as well with CrowdSec because we've got access, we're not getting blocked. So with any luck, we should be able to go to our Pi-hole now, and we should be able to change that one, get a DNS record in there, and fingers crossed, all of our DNS records are now working with all of our traffic labels. So we've pretty much got everything working. So now that's pretty much it. I'm not going to go through any more of the configuration. I've got videos on all of this stuff, but just go to Pi-hole, get all of your DNS records from your traffic labels into that Pi-hole, and that should give you everything you need. Now, as I said, I don't necessarily recommend this is the best way to do it. I prefer to break them out, for example, but it's a good way for me to be able to rapidly spin up a Homelab so that I can do some testing of new devices. More on that one to come. Anyway, if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.